The Geneva Convention of 1929 set forth new rules about how POWs should be treated during wartime. These provisions, although not officially signed by Japan, were agreed upon by the Japanese Emperor. During World War II, specifically after Pearl Harbor, these provisions were completely ignored by the Japanese military. The Japanese violated multiple provisions. Specifically, some of them that were broken were Article 30, which says that prisoners of war shall not be subjected to excessive amounts of work, as well as Article 14, which states that prisoners of war shall be treated for their wounds and illnesses. The culture of serving in the military in Japan also played a major role in the treatment of POWs. One of the worst things that could happen to a Japanese soldier is to be captured by the enemy. This idea was projected onto the enemies that they captured and is one reason why they were treated so poorly.
I'm here with Bill Drower, a survivor of the Japanese prisoner of war camps during World War II. So, what can you remember about the living quarters in the camps?
They're terrible. We slept on wooden slats. Everyone was crowded together, and every morning we'd be awakened and yelled at to get to work.
Okidu!
How were you fed? Can you tell me what the food was like?
We were fed very poorly. We were rationed dirty rice, soup, and occasionally, if we were lucky, fish and bread.
I'm here with Thomas Brown, a World War II historian from Clark University. What was the work like in the POW camps in Japan?
Absolutely horrible. Many of these men worked long, grueling hours with little regard for their health. For camps near a jungle, men often had to work clearing vegetation, completely nude. This led to cuts and infection which could be fatal. Fruit often hung from the trees, taunting them as it was just out of reach.
The guards weren't concerned for their safety at all?
Not at all. They would force these prisoners to work until they died, beating them for any mistake or slowing down. Also, they were already malnourished due to their unpredictable feedings and low-quality food, which caused their work to further deteriorate.
The treatment of POWs in Japan by guards was cruel and unjust. Their actions were often erratic, sometimes treating the prisoners as people, while other times treating them like a wild animal. The POWs would be beaten and made an example of in front of other prisoners at seemingly random moments. The guards didn't have a set of rules for how to punish the prisoners. This means that some prisoners would get off without punishment for other severe mistakes, while others would be beaten to the brink of death for standing wrong. Everyone in the camp had their own number, so the Japanese could identify them. If you were caught trying to escape, you'd be brought back to camp and dig your own grave.
Eyes down!
Unbroken is a book about a World War II American bombardier and Olympic runner named Louis Zamperini, whose plane went down the Pacific, landing him in a Japanese prison camp for the rest of the war. After spending 45 days at sea, he was captured by a Japanese ship and sent to a small camp before being transferred to Omori, a prison camp in Tokyo. In this camp, he was targeted by the commanding officer, Mutsuhiro Watanabe, aka the Bird. The Bird often called Louis his friend, then proceeded to beat him harshly. Eventually, Watanabe was promoted and left the camp. Due to bombing raids on Tokyo, all of the prisoners of Omori were transferred to Naotsu labor camp, where they had to load coal all day. Unfortunately, this is where Watanabe was promoted to, and Louis got targeted until the end of the war, when they were liberated by the Americans.
Punch him in the face.
Punch him! Next!
Come on. Come on. Come on.
Next!
Okay, come on, sir. Come on.
Hit her! down! Come on! Hit me!
Was there a constant fear of making the wrong expression and having the Japanese react to that?
Well, you tried to stay away from them as much as you could, but sometimes they'd come after people for certain things, and they'd beat on them.
Was there a sense that some of their abuses were just arbitrary or without cause?
Yeah.
Why do you think that was?
It's hard for me to... The Japanese just had such a hatred for the Americans that they used every excuse they could to be cruel.
The Bataan Death March was a march in the Philippines. 76,000 prisoners of war were forced by the Japanese military to endure the march of 66 miles. It was in April 1942 during the early stages of World War II. These soldiers consisted of 66,000 Filipinos and 10,000 Americans. The soldiers were broken up into groups of around 100 and marched the 5 days from the southern end of the Bataan Peninsula to San Fernando. Although the exact numbers are unknown, thousands of men died during the march. The survivors were taken from San Fernando by rail to prisoner of war camps, where many more died.
WWII!
The beginning of the end for the Japanese POW camps came as soon as the Japanese surrendered. The soldiers posted in the camps were put on trial for committing war crimes against the POWs. Allied forces began setting up assembly areas for the newly freed POWs. Many Japanese were found guilty of committing these crimes, and 28 of them were sentenced to death by hanging. Some camps were a bigger subject of the trials than others. This was because, although many people died in all the camps, some of them did it so in a less humane way. Even though the war was over and the POWs were freed, these camps would haunt them until the day that they died.
I'm here with Thomas Brown, a World War II historian from Clark University. What was the work like in the labor camp?
Stop laughing.
Go.
I'm here with Thomas Brown, a World War II historian.
I'm here
World War II. So, what can you remember about the living quarters in the camps?
I forgot my thing.